been teaching I've been teaching Copic for about, oh gosh, about 18 years now, something around there, online and in-person live. Today, I am doing this in conjunction with Copic US and with Michael's to give you guys a lesson about Copic markers and kind of what some of the new things, or not new, but some of the different things that they can do. So a lot of you out there are crafters and artists, and if you have not used Copic markers before, we are going to be using a group of different colors. And what we're going to be using today are some sketch markers and some, sorry, get that off my board, some of the chow markers as well. These have the same ink in them. It's the exact same color. So when you have, if I tell you I'm going to use an RV06 and I happen to be using one of these sketch markers, is if your RV06 is a chow marker, it's exactly the same color. So don't worry so much about the body. It's going to be the exact same ink. And then all of the Copic markers are an alcohol-based ink. And what that means is that the colorant, or the color that's in the marker that you're going to put down on your page or on your project, is all suspended in alcohol. So like when we were kids and we used Crayolas, those are all suspended in water. And so when you work on paper, they kind of just sit on top of each other. They don't do a whole lot. But with alcohol-based markers, those markers are going to blend. Those colors can blend together. So layering them is more similar to a watercolor effect or a painting effect. So it's a really cool effect. The other thing about alcohol markers, and we're going to take full advantage of this today, is that we are going to be putting them on a different surface. We're not going to be coloring on paper today. We're going to actually color on glass. But with Copics, you can color on metal, plastic, fabric, glass, all of those different things. And so today we're going to put them on some glass. One of the other things that's kind of neat about the Copic markers is that the nibs are replaceable. The ink is refillable. So once you've bought a marker, it should last your lifetime. They are pretty indestructible. And then the other piece is, and you've got two nibs on both the chow and the sketch. You've got a little brush nib, and you've got a chisel nib or a medium broad nib. And so that is pretty cool to have that advantage as well. And then Copic is also doesn't have a whole lot of scent to them. A lot of alcohol markers, you pop open that lid and there's that really strong scent. And with Copic, you just don't have that. And so there's a lot of advantages to that as well. Let's see. I think the one other thing I was going to mention with the two different types of marker bodies that you're going to see today is that the chow, there's 180 different colors in that body, like already. And then the sketch, there's actually 358. So there's a lot of markers out there. The group that we're going to be using today, the colors we're going to use today, are ones that are kind of featured as June color of the month on Copic US. And in a few minutes, I'm going to pull my friend Shannon. She's kind of sitting in the wings with me, and she is over in the chat room too. So she and Nate can answer all of your Copic questions. If you have ones as I'm going, throw questions for me over in the chat, and they're going to stop me when they need to and make sure you guys can get those questions answered, or they might be able to answer them right away. A lot of times they will be able to. But in a few minutes, I'm going to have Shannon tell you a little bit more about the color of the month for Copic, so that you guys know what that is all about. So it's kind of a fun feature, especially if you're new to Copic. It's a great way to start building some color combinations. All right. So I think we've given everybody a few minutes to kind of scoot their way in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to switch down onto my desktop. Thank you so much. And what I am using today to start is I've got a set of stamps from Recollections. And then I've got, this is literally copy paper. So really inexpensive, cheap paper. I've got an acrylic block that I'm going to use for stamping. And then I've got some Memento black ink. Now, if I was going to color my stamps on the paper. This is a great one to use with Copic because it will stay put. But if I was not, it wouldn't matter quite as much. But today, all I'm doing is stamping to get a bunch of different flowers. So I've taken, let's see, actually, I think I'm going to do it this way because I can get more on. I'm going to put 2 or 3 of the flowers from this set on this acrylic block. And it doesn't matter how they're spaced out because I'm going to actually cut them apart. So I've got 3 of the flowers on there and I'm going to ink them up. And again, this is not something I'm going to color. I'm just using it as a roadmap. So if you have a different image that you wanted to use, you are certainly more than welcome to. But I'm going to do 2 or 3 stamps of this guy. So, and I'm just trying to do it on my copy paper. I'm going to keep stamping because I want at least 3, if not 4 of these. And Shannon, would you tell us all a little bit more about the Copic colors of the month?
Yes, sorry, I just need to unmute myself. There's already there's already a fair amount of questions coming in the chat.
Okay.
So yeah, I just want to, I mean, I've typed those up, but I just want to reiterate a few questions. And yeah, so I think it's Eileen here says she wants to use Copic ink on her windows on either side of her front door. And if she cleans it, will it wash off the window? And I said yes. Typically your alcohol inks on glass or plastic surface, specifically glass, they will wipe off if you scrub them, or, and Michelle will probably show this later on in this class, so you get a fuller look at that. But due to the alcohol pigment, just the medium itself, it will rub off. Now, if you want to use a chalk marker or like an acrylic marker or things like that on window, that would stay, or it would just take a lot more scrubbing to get rid of. So just be aware of the medium and the surface because it will give different effects. And today, when Michelle is showing this class, we're going to use the Copic ink as in a much different way than what's typically used. And this is just an approach to using your alcohol ink on a glass surface. And it's going to look really different compared to marker on paper. And it'll give that stained glass translucent effect, as Michelle was saying earlier. But I do want to put in the chat, this is a link to our Instagram page. And basically on our social media accounts, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everything that Copic US is on, every month we post 15 colors that we curate that kind of meet the seasonal months that we're in. So this particular month of June, we have some yellows, some pink, a little bit of olive green and blue greens. So it's kind of like an oceanic, florally, depending on where you live in the country. I know some places are a lot hotter than others, but we try to give that kind of beachy summer vibe, whereas maybe in January, our colors were more gray tones and blues because it's winter in most places. So we stick to seasonal colors, but those are just a starting off point, especially if you struggle with picking colors out. Because I know sometimes, especially if you don't like draw your piece from start to finish and you just want to color, it's hard to pick which colors to choose. So we just started doing these colors of the month to help people pick out colors, as 358 can be very daunting, kind of scary. There's so many choices. You're like, where the heck do I start? And what is BG01 different to BG91? So those are just examples, but yeah, so we have those colors of the month just as a guide, and you don't have to use all 15 colors. You can choose 3 or 4, but they will look good together, and that's why we have put them in a group. Same with our sets. If you're looking for where to start coloring, say you want to color people, we have a 6-piece portrait set, and that's a great place to get started. minimal colors, but you can do a whole lot with them. So there's a lot of different choices out there, and I think there's a lot of good options and inspiration from our social media pages. If you guys have any kind of places to jumpstart your creativity. Yes, okay, so is this only on Instagram? Yeah, that link is the Instagram link, but if you go to Copic Official, let me try and find a Facebook link, but it will be on Facebook as well. It might take me a minute to find that link real quick, but yeah. And then I'll hand it over to Michelle as she's happily cutting.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Shannon. So I stamped that kind of group of 3 flowers. I did that about 5 times. And then there was one more little tiny bud in the set. And so I stamped that up about 4 times. I don't think I'm going to need this many, but I figured I'd rather have too many to start versus not have quite enough. So as you can see, what I'm doing now is I'm cutting it out. This is not fussy cutting. This is like chunk off the paper cutting. This is not detail. All I'm trying to do is get them separated. And that way, when I attach them into the vase where I want them to go, then I can kind of overlap them. And so I'm just getting some of that excess white paper off. And in fact, I'm gonna leave that there. My guess is I have plenty, but we'll kind of go from there. All right, so I've got this big pile of flowers, and then I have this kind of short, stubby vase, and it's got a little bit of thickness to it. So for me, it's not super fragile, which I like. But one of the big keys that I liked about this one was this nice, big, wide opening, because then I can get my hands inside to attach these little images. So if you have a vase that has a much narrower top, it's still going to work. Any glass surface is going to work. But for me, the way I'm doing this with using these little flowers, this is going to be easier to have a little bit wider top. And then I've got some washi tape. Any type of kind of crafting tape, actually masking tape, scotch tape, really any type of tape is going to work for what we're doing next. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take these flowers and I'm going to put them on the inside, and I'm going to tack them kind of at the top. And then I probably am going to go down on most of them and give them one little stick somewhere near the bottom too. And it doesn't matter if the tape is kind of hanging off. You can see this is like kind of messy. If anything, I'm just trying to get them pretty straight up and down, so those stems are kind of lending the way or standing a little bit tall. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to set another one fairly close. And the paper's probably going to overlap. The tape's probably going to get in the way a little bit. This is more about just getting these guys attached in than anything. So I'm going to have these 2 that kind of sit right side by side with each other. And I like the look of that. And then I'm going to make a jump and get another guy in there. I should have given myself 20 little pieces of tape all ready to go at the start. All right. So let's see, this one is a little different. So let's give this a little space. And then maybe this guy, we'll keep him tall again. Scoot around. Get one of these little buds and we'll put it way down low, but we'll tuck it in again fairly close to that one. But now this is fun. We have kind of this opening up top. So I think let's get one of these bigger ones and we'll even tuck it in so they're going to overlap a little bit. Right like that. And see, I'm not concerned about how the stem, like I can't see that stem anymore. I'm more concerned about that blossom, that I can see the majority of that. You're going to see as we get going on the actual coloring, this is not a super precise process. This is very different than coloring on paper. This is going to be much looser. So you're going to have to kind of take a deep breath, relax. It's going to be a little messy looking to start, but it's going to turn out oh so cool. You're going to love it. We'll scoot over, get another tall one over here.
Michelle, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah, of course.
So, do you know how wide of a diameter this glass happens to be?
This one, that is a really good question. So
Sorry to pause you.
no. So if this is 8.5, I'm gonna say it's about 5.
5-inch diameter. Okay.
5. Yep.
Okay.
That's my very scientific method.
There we go.
It's working. It's working.
Yeah, just because I saw in the chat, like, how many flowers do you think you'll need? And I just said it depends on the size. So if you
Absolutely.
have a 5-inch diameter, I was just, and you're layering too. So
Yep. And I think some of it's going to depend on what you end up liking the look of. I like them being kind of little groupings together. I like that look versus having just singular stems, like evenly spaced. I'd rather have little clusters of them. And so, yeah, I think it'll be partially how big your vase is, but then also how, the look that you like when you, as you start putting them in. All right. So I'm going to find a couple little spots that are kind of floating and just tack them down. Because this isn't super precise, I don't need everything like perfectly like attached, or I'm just trying to get this kind of fun, a little bit random. So we've got some high, some low, some are really tight together, and then we've got a few that are more standalone, which I love having both. So, and you can see some of these where I tucked them really low, they're kind of folding into the vase. And that part, again, it doesn't matter. I just want it so it gets close to that bottom. This particular vase has a really heavy base to it. Like the glass at the bottom is almost, I mean, that's a good 1/2 inch, almost 3/4 inch thick down here at the bottom. And you'll see as when we do some final details, we'll go all the way to that bottom edge, even though my paper is only ending kind of where that vase, the kind of open space is. All right. So I've got them all in there. I kind of like the look of how they're spread out. So I've got all these extra flowers that I don't need, and that's okay for another day. And then I've got 2 different little color groups that I'm going to use for the flower tops, for the petals. I've got 2 red violets, and the red violets are RV09. That's one of them. And the second one is RV06. So I've got kind of a light and a dark, but you're going to notice, so that light one ends in that number 6. This isn't a super light marker. It's actually more in that mid-tone range. For working on glass or a non-porous surface, you're going to have much better luck, especially a transparent surface like this. You're going to have better luck with darker colors. If you get super light, it's going to be hard to see them. And you're going to see a little bit of this because my second color combination is a YR24 and a YR21. And you'll see that YR21, you're going to barely see that color when it hits the glass. It'll actually be pretty transparent, but it's going to have just enough there to give us that light effect. So those are going to be the 2 little groups that I'm going to use on the petals. And I'm going to start with my red violets because I think that has a really dramatic, you guys can see it really well. And I'm actually going to start with my darker of my 2 markers. So I'm going to grab my RV09. And I'm going to come, this is kind of my, like one of my little standalones that's sitting by itself. And there is no way that I'm going to get all of this little tiny fine detail. So I'm going to have it pointing up pretty much straight ahead. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to go from the base of the petal and kind of flick upward, you're going to get a lot of squeaking because of the glass. And I'm going to do that on some of these big petals, these main ones that are kind of closest to the viewer. But I'm not going to necessarily get to do every one, and some of them are going to kind of combine into one big petal instead of two smaller petals. So it's more hitting these petals in general. And then as I come up and I've got all of these little guys up here, I'm going to put a little bit of that darker color up in here too, but I'm not going to, again, there's no way to keep it truly inside those lines. And you can kind of see as mine rocks back and forth, it almost looks like that line is moving, right? You've got that thickness of glass. So this is not a precise process, ladies and gentlemen out there. So I'm going to switch over to my RV06. And now I'm going to come from kind of the top of the petals or the outer edge of the petals, and I'm going to flick back into that darker color. Now, what you're going to notice right away, if you're familiar with Copics, this is where those colors would usually start blending. And what's happening now is it's pushing the color. It's actually pushing that darker color away. It's pushing it down. And so it's kind of creating this edge between the light and the dark. And also what's happening is I'm getting a little bit of that darker color on my lighter marker. So once I've kind of made my route around, I've got all those little outer edges hit with my lighter marker. I'm going to come over on my scratch paper that's underneath my work area. And all I'm going to do is scribble off. And you can kind of see on the edges where that little bit darker color caught on, but now my marker nib is nice and clean. There's none of that darker color on there. I'm going to use my darker marker one more time to kind of push back up into that lighter color, because I like the look of that almost like vein work coming up from the bottom edge of the petals. But you could choose to leave it how we had it. The fun part about Copics is a lot of times, no matter if you're working on paper or glass like this, is you can come back and do things over again a lot of times. So you get to kind of play around with the effect you want. All right, I'm pretty happy with that one. Now, if I pull that flower away right now, it's just going to look kind of like a pink blob. I get that. It does. We're not done with it yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to work our way around, and let's pick some more flowers to do pink. And then we're going to do some yellow. We're going to do all of our Copic work first, and then I'm going to show you how to turn that into a more distinct flower. All right. So let's spin the vase, and we're going to keep working with these RVs. And Shannon, I'll keep chatting, and Nate too. But if you guys see questions as we're coloring our way around the vase, this is obviously another good time if we want to answer more Copic questions.
Yeah, I think I might as well speak some answers rather than just type them. Yeah, so somebody asked me if you can seal the ink when you're done to help protect it to not wash away. And I know in the past I have used, and I have my camera on, but it's Kmart varnish. So this is what it looks like. You shake it and you spray it outside, well ventilated area, because it's like an aerosol spray, but it will help to seal your ink so it won't move if like a splash of water or something like that gets near it. It works for colored pencils and other mediums as well, not just markers, but it does kind of help solidify the pigment or whatever medium you're using to not move or get ruined. But if you do take, especially if this is alcohol markers or alcohol ink, and if you take like an alcohol wipe or something like that, it will wipe away. Like we just don't want you to intentionally like put this through the dishwasher, or, you know, it's not a ceramic piece where it will like get fired in a kiln and stay permanent. Alcohol ink, how do you say that? Non-porous, like it's not going to completely soak in or stay in a solid state, excuse me, versus like an acrylic paint marker. Yes, so acrylic paint markers will behave differently because it's an opaque pigment. versus alcohol pigment is a more translucent and will soak into like a paper, but will sit on the surface of a glass or a plastic. So actually, I think this was the end of 2020. I gave a class on shrinky dinks and how to use shrink plastic with Copic markers. And you can use markers with shrink plastic. And when you use a heat gun or something like that to fire up your shrinky dink, the color gets darker as the plastic shrinks. But as you use the heat, it solidifies the color. So I assume as well, if you use a heat gun, if we're, talking rationally with the shrinking ink technique, a heat gun could also solidify alcohol pigment on glass or plastic. So those are just our suggestions. If Michelle, you have any other ideas?
So I think it depends on like how wet you're trying to get it. Dishwasher, stuff like that, you're not going to be able to do that. But if it's a vase and you just want to protect it from a little bit of water droplets or something like that, I know people have even used like a Mod Podge to seal it in. And again, that's not necessarily something you can run through a dishwasher, but it's going to protect it from just little drips of water and stuff like that. And I think the other thing to say with Copic is once it's dry on your glass, a drop or splash of water is not going to erase it. It does take that alcohol solvent to like completely erase it. But if you scrub it, it will. But if it like got splashed with something or was sitting on the counter, or you were filling a vase with water and it got a tiny bit on the outside, if you just dab it off, you're not gonna wipe it off. It's there fairly permanently too. So yeah, but no, those are good suggestions for that, Shannon. Thank you.
Yeah, and another thing too is because some people have this debate of should you start with your darker colors first and go light, or like, that's an age-old debate with Copic. For Michelle here, she's starting with the dark, and I mean, I'm not trying to speak for you, but I would do this as well because the lighter pigment will react with the darker one as it touches and thus lighten that darker color a little bit more, versus if you put the light color down first, the dark color will just completely overpower it and there's not as much mixing. So it looks like there's more contrast and it's not as blended. On paper, you can do this, opposite effect as well, start light and go dark. But when you start dark, it's easier to build up those smoother transition of color without layering as much. I think that's the simplest way I can put it.
Yep. And I would tell you, if you're really interested in also learning Copic, using it on paper with stamps, and you're going to find people that truly only do one way or the other. You're going to find people that are always a person who works dark to light, and you're going to find people that always work from light to dark. And then you're going to find those of us who have discovered, ooh, I can use both of these techniques and I'm going to get way better use out of my markers, because there's certain times that I want the effects that I can get working from light to dark, or I want the effects that I get from working dark to light. So I know in my coloring tutorials, you will see me switch back and forth between the two all the time, because there's certain situations where one is better suited than the other. So yeah, for certain. I think the one thing with my glass that I showed you guys this already, that I'm just really cautious about, no matter which I'm starting with, light or dark, when I come back in with my light, I'm just making sure to clean off that marker, because I am picking up a little bit of that darker color. So as long as you're doing that, you can keep going back and forth and pulling both of those colors, light and dark. So I'm going to switch, and I've got a YR24 and a YR21. And let's see, the YR, we'll talk a little bit about those color, what all of that means on there for those of you who are new to Copic. So the YR on that marker stands for the color family. And this is, believe it or not, this is the darker of the two. You can see already how light this is. And then So it stands for yellow red. So on my other ones that we were using, the RV, that stands for red violet. So those letters on your Copic marker stand for the color family. It's what color family it comes from. Then you've got some numbers. And the numbers, the first number on the marker is considered the saturation number. And what that means is how much gray has been added to the marker. So on this marker, I've got a YR, yellow, red, and then I've got a 2. And that means there's a little bit of gray that's been added into that mix. This one does too, YR 2. So that saturation number on both of those is a 2. Now I want you to notice while I'm coloring now, this is that YR21. And I've hit some of these petals, and you can see where it pushes the darker color, and you can barely see, if I can get you a little closer, you can barely see that yellow that's going on there. So this is a really pale one, and you'll have some colors that you try and you're like, ooh, this would be beautiful on glass. And it looks like it's not showing up at all, and it maybe is not. It's so light. Try one that's like a couple shades darker, and you might have the exact color you want. All right, so there's what my yellow red combo is looking like. Same concept for me. I'm gonna have that darker color in near the bases of the petals, right in tight against the base in that center area, and pushing out from there. All right, and then the third piece, going back to our number lesson here, the third piece on all of your markers is now another number. So we had the YR, we have the 2, that's the saturation, and then on this one we have a 4. And that 4 stands for the value, or how dark the marker is. So as the number gets higher, the marker gets darker. It's a darker shade. So that YR21, because it ends in a 1, it's a very light tint, or a lighter version of that color. So we have a color family, a saturation number, and then we have the value number. And that is the magic, or the mystery, of the Copic numbering system. And then of course you have your oddballs that don't quite follow the rules, but that's the basics. All right, Shannon, do we have any other questions going through there, or Nate?
Yeah, just some more questions about sealers, and I just said the Kmart varnish, the Mod Podge idea, potentially also a heat gun, since we talked about that working for shrinking ink plastic. So thinking that could work too. And again,
oh, I think it would. Yep.
Yeah, and sometimes when you add heat to alcohol pigment, it can make it a little bit darker as well. So for glass, that might be a good thing since it appears more transparent. And then Kathy is concerned about smearing, but I don't think the ink is going to take long to dry on the glass. I said within about 10 seconds. Maybe it's different if you live in a more humid place. I'm not sure. But
yeah, so for that specifically, Shannon, that's part of why I'm doing this the way I'm doing it, by doing the pink on one bloom and then turning it and doing the bloom and turning it and doing a bloom. By the time I got back around, these are completely dry. Like, and even as it gets to the point where it's hitting that table, it's basically dry. And I think what we get confused by, or maybe even a little bit off by, is there's a lot of alcohol ink techniques out there where you're dripping ink, and so it's pooling. And so it does have some dry time involved with that. Even with Copic ink, it does take a little bit longer to dry. But because I'm actually coloring with the markers instead of dripping on here right now, the layer of ink just isn't that thick. And so the amount of alcohol, it evaporates fairly quickly. And so you're left with just that thin layer of ink. And so it does dry fairly quickly. It's a great question though.
Yeah, and even I say this a lot when I give people advice when they're working on a paper. Don't be afraid to turn the paper. And like
Oh,
you're turning and rotating your surface. Of course, it's also circular, but don't
yes.
be afraid to, to move. Otherwise, you're, trying to navigate around your own paper, and it just don't make more
Oh,
work for yourself.
no. Remember that most of the time we're working on, especially crafters and people that are working on stamped images. I mean, flip the flower upside down, get the angle that your hand wants to work at. There's no reason not to keep that turning for sure.
Exactly.
All right, so we have the stems left, and I am going to use 2 yellow greens. So practice our knowledge here. We've got a YG. These are both YGs. So those are yellow greens. Both of these, the first number on both of these is a 9, which means that's going to have quite a bit of gray added into that yellow green. So yellow greens, a lot of times we think of as really bright and vibrant. These still are that same yellow green family. There's a lot of yellow in these, but they also have quite a bit of gray because of that first saturation number, that 9. And so it looks like it's been dulled down a little bit. And then we have one that's ending in a 5 and one that's ending in a 9. So again, we have one that's kind of right in that middle range. And then we also have one that's really dark. So I'm going to start this time. This one I'm going to do a little different. I am going to start with my lighter marker. And what I'm literally going to do, so we've got these stems and you can tell it kind of curls back into the vase. I'm literally going to run in general right down, but I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of the vase. This is that YG95. It is not following those lines exactly. I'm just using the lines that I have on the stamp to kind of give myself a general stem. And in a second here, I'm going to run that YG95 because there's not a lot of detail. So I'll do all of it, but I want to show you what I'm going to come back and do with the YG99 is I'm going to run down the left edge just to give it a tiny bit of definition. And then I'm going to come right up underneath the flower and add just a touch more of that YG99. So those are the 2 things I'm going to do with that darker color. And that is it. So I'm going to grab my YG95 and I'm going to start on each of these stems. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of my vase, right up underneath that flower. And this one's even floating, but I want to go ahead and make sure to attach it all the way down. So it goes all the way to the bottom of my vase. Now, I'm going to tell you that the reason I'm doing this is when I first tried this project, I stopped it right where the opening of the vase stops, and I left that big heavy glass block blank. And it really looked like all my flowers were just kind of randomly floating. And so I really want to attach them down. Let's see. This one, the tape is in the way, but I can still get that general sense of going all the way down, spinning, spinning, couple left. And the fun part is once I take those papers out here in just a few minutes, you won't have any sense of where, if I got them perfectly aligned or not. So, and everybody's will look totally different. So, because I know some of these I'm probably tipped a little bit to the side, and so it doesn't look like they're even inside the lines at all. Okay, back around. So now I can switch. Don't roll away. Grab my YG99. And I'm going to come in. I'm going to go down the left-hand side and right up underneath that flower. Right down that left-hand edge, and it can be wiggly, just like the stamp. I love how the stamp has that stem being and just a little not perfectly straight. Works well for me. This is not necessarily going to be an easy thing to keep a straight line on. So I like that effect. Now on a couple of these little flower images, you could argue that some of those pieces up top were leaves. And so if you wanted to, you could include a few leaves on there as well. And you can use both that YG95 and the YG99.
Yeah, I think too, if you wanted, because I know my OCD, and I think Eileen, I think here in the chat, was saying that her OCD wants you to stop where like the actual water containment will end and the glass
Yeah,
is. But even
I
if you
totally
want,
get it.
yeah, but in that space too, you could even use the flicking technique to make grass along that entire bottom rim and
Yep.
just flick upwards if you want. There's a lot
Yeah.
of possibilities there, but anyways, just wanted to throw that out there. You're not alone, Michelle.
Yeah, no. And so honestly, and if you're a person who really wants to stop there, I would tell you try it. See what it looks like. Just stop it there, do 2 or 3 of the flowers and finish them all the way. I'm going to show you how to finish them here in just a second, but finish them all the way, pull the paper out and take a look at it. See what you think. When I looked at it with them stopping here and then having all this glass at the bottom without the stem continuing down, it looked really odd to me visually. And so for me personally, I was like, there's no question. And so I literally on my first attempt, I had done this. I finished the flower with the black outline. And then I came back and added all the stems after the fact because I'm like, no, there's no way. So you can still come back and change that even after the fact really carefully. So there's actually only one more step on this guy. And what that entails is a whole different kind of pen. This is a paint pen. This particular one is made by Sharpie, and it is an oil-based paint pen. So couple keys here. I'm doing this step last. I'm not going to put my Copic on top of it. It's going on top of the Copic, and that is really, really key. Okay, you want to make sure you do this step after you're done with your Copic. So it's going to go on top of everything. The other thing is Sharpie, at least in the past, used to make some other versions of their paint pens, and you're going to find other paint pens out there that are water-based. Water-based ink is not going to stick to this vase, to the glass. So you are specifically looking for a paint pen that is oil-based. So this is a black one. This is a fine tip one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way around and I'm going to literally try to follow those black lines from my stamp. Now, here is the key. If I turn my vase even slightly, those black lines shift just because of the thickness of the glass. And because this is a paint pen, you can get some that have a smaller nib right down here. You can get some that have a tighter nib, but a lot of times with oil, it's not going to get a whole lot smaller than this. So there's no way that I'm going to hit all those little tiny petals. So I am going to have to simplify that. So let's start with the big ones again. Okay. And by now my Copic is pretty much dry. I'm not worried about that. But I'm literally going to come in and I'm going to start hitting some of these petals. And what we'll do is we're going to go all the way through on this flower. And I'm going to show you, I'll go ahead and do the magic trick. I'm going to pull the paper off so you guys can see what one of the finished ones is going to look like. So let's get a few more of these guys. And again, I might come around and there's going to be another one of this particular, the exact same flower, like 2 sections down. When I do the outline, it might look different. I might skip a different petal. So don't worry about that part. All right, so up here in this little mess, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 petals. I think today on this particular one, there's going to be 1, 2, 3. There's 3 petals instead. So I'm cutting it about in half, and that is going to work a whole lot better. Then I've got this long stem. For me, it's going to help to kind of get the heel of my hand on the vase, or connect some part of my hand onto the vase to go the length. And I want them a little wiggly just because it's a natural, it's a stem. And then when I'm done, this particular flower can come out. And that is what it's going to look like. It's kind of that stained glass. And then I found a spot. There we go. So this is the effect I'm going for. The oil pen, this is going to take a few seconds to dry as well, but okay, I just colored that and it's not coming off on my finger, so I'm not super concerned. So I'm just going to work my way around and start doing these. Now, again, when they have a bunch of little tiny petals, there's no way. So pick and choose. Keep it simple. And you can add a few in. And again, you'll have to probably, my paper shifted on that one, so I'm having to do some guesswork. I could stop and read.
I was just going to say another helpful tip here. Sometimes if you just look at where your alcohol ink has flowed, that will kind of help give you a natural border, because when you colored this, Michelle, earlier, you flicked in the direction that the petal was going in.
Yeah.
So if the stencil gets wonky, you can kind of just follow the lines of your alcohol ink. That might be a helpful hint.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing kind of a combination of that, Shannon. I've got those lines kind of where what she's talking about, is you can see where the ink kind of beaded up, where the two colors met, and like she said, where I kind of the direction I was flicking. And so I'm using that. And then as I get higher up on the flower, the pattern behind it is a little more in place. So it's a little bit easier to see. But and then up here, again, I'm going to try to kind of simplify this down, because there's no way to get all those fun little petals, but we'll get several of them. So we still have that effect of those little tiny ruffles at the top. All right. We've got this little bud. These guys are fun and quick. So the other product that I found at Michael's that you could do some of this with, but I think you'd have to do a different kind of stamp. It would be a little hard to do with these flowers. There's actually different types of glue that have pigment in them. And so you can find a black glue that then you could come back and do your kind of outlining. And again, that makes a different look. It still looks like a stained glass image, but it's even harder to control than the paint pen. So your borders end up even wider. So you might end up doing something more like just general shapes versus trying to do flowers. That would be a better use of that particular product, but it's another way to do something like this. Dun, dun, dun. Trying to think if there's other things that you guys might like to know. So I have used this technique.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Michelle, I do have a question. Yes, this one just came in.
Okay.
What would you put in this vase?
So
there's a lot you can do, yeah.
Yeah, so to me, this becomes more of a decorative piece in that I would use it more like it's a pencil or pen holder, or it could be a floral arrangement, but it might be, I might be tempted to do something more like silk flowers, or, ooh, a fun one would be like succulents that you could put like either little, like the glass beads or sand in the bottom, and then succulents, like the little, they're not silk. Not sure what the succulents, the fake ones, are made out of, but you could do a little succulent grouping. Or so you could actually still fill the vase with something solid, like more solid, or like a sand or something decorative, so that it still shows off your pretty artwork. Or it can sit pretty by a window.
Yeah, I agree. Especially if you intend on putting succulents in it, you can always find succulent stamps. So it's
There you
kind
go.
of a
Yeah.
reflection piece. Yeah. Another question. I know that we use the stamp as kind of a guide to the coloring.
Yeah. Mhm.
Now, why would you not use the stamp directly on the glass?
Okay. So here's the conundrum with that one. If I stamp on glass, I would need to use like an oil-based ink, or one that's going to stick to glass. So the one product I know out there for stamping that would do that is Stays On ink. The problem is, once I have stamped that on, I pretty much can't use my Copics with it, because as soon as that alcohol hits that Stays On ink, it's going to start dissolving it. It's going to get all over my nibs on my Copics, which will actually ruin a Copic nib. So,
Ah,
and the challenge, I mean, if you could figure out a way to stamp on the inside of the vase and then color the outside, that would work. But unfortunately, the inks that are out there that will stamp onto glass are just not Copic compatible. It's a great question, though.
yeah, I figured that because this is an oil-based Sharpie you're using right now and we're adding it last, if you
Yep.
added the oil-based Sharpie first, then you basically, because it's a black pigment and it's going to ruin any color Copic marker nib. So
Yes.
that's why we're doing it last. And
Yep.
yeah, it's one of those times where the order that you color does matter. Um,
Yep.
so it definitely makes a difference here. Yeah.
Yep. And I will be the first to admit, Shannon, that I have cheated. So in the Copic world, they'll tell you if you do mixed media with your Copic, meaning you're combining different mediums, you're doing some colored pencil work, or you're painting, or doing some other things besides Copic work, the general rule of thumb is that you always put your Copics down first, and then you come back and you do your other mediums. So, but it, as a lot of people would tell you in the art world, rules are made to be broken. So here's the deal. Here's the rub. You can break those rules by putting another thing down first. You can put your paint down first. You can put your gesso down first. You can put your colored pencil down first. But you also need to take ownership or responsibility of that, and know that you could ruin a nib by doing that. So I have done a lot of experimenting with layering Copics on top of things that I'm not supposed to layer them on top of. But I also knew that, well, I might ruin a nib, but I also know I can replace it. And so I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to try coloring on top of gesso. I'm going to try coloring on top of chalk. But I have to also know that I might have to replace that nib down the line, or even right after I finish that project. So being really cautious. The one cautionary note I would give you about doing things though with things like the Stays On ink or with this oil-based pen is there are a few things that will actually suck up into your markers, and it will actually ruin your marker, not just your nib. So especially oil-based stuff like oil pastels, or an oil-based pen like this, or the other really toxic one, and you're going to laugh because I know people who do use this with their Copics, is whiteout. That one will actually kill your marker. So just be really cautious about what you're going to use your Copics on top of. go online, figure out if other people have tried it before, see if they may have to replace a nib, but it worked and it was fun. And then you can give it a try yourself.
Yeah, I would definitely say watch YouTube videos or look on Facebook. Learn from other people's mistakes first, so you don't have to
Yeah,
make them too. Exactly. I'm
yeah.
with you.
And I tell people all the time, that's what I'm doing, is I'm making their mistakes for them so they don't have to.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, another question we can just talk about is do Copics and Sharpie have a long life? Considering the number of flowers on this vase, how many vases do you think could be made with these markers and the Sharpie? And I think we both know the answer to this. Sharpie are disposable and Copics are refillable. So theoretically speaking, they can last you forever.
So two things with that. So the Copic, to color on glass, you're using actually very little ink because of the fact that it's sitting on top of the surface. It's not getting absorbed into the paper. So the Copics are going to do, truly hundreds. It actually would go and go and go and go. The paint pen is a little bit different. My guess is, so I've done the equivalent of 1, 2, 3, 4, like I've done the equivalent just with practicing and experimenting of about 4 or 5 of these vases with this one pen. So I know it has some longevity to it. The Copics are going to have more just because of how much ink is in each one of those Copics and the fact that it just is barely sitting on the surface. But you would actually get, without having to refill it, and obviously with refilling, it's just going to keep going. But without having to refill it, you're still going to get, you'd probably get at least 20 with the Copics at minimum. It just doesn't use very much ink at all.
Yeah, that's true. And I think part of the reason that this particular demo works so well is because you have a contrast too of lots of color in the bulb of the flowers and then a long skinny stem. So all
Yeah.
of those things don't use a ton of pigment, but you still get a pretty composition and balance here. So I think kind of definitely we have all learned from your trials and errors here, I think.
Yeah, and I did do a lot of experimenting. I just want to tell you guys, because I know there's a lot of alcohol ink techniques out there, and because I tried a couple different things to try to get a background with this. And for me, this ended up the best of keeping it pretty clean, pretty simple. I could definitely pack the flowers in closer if I wanted it, or I could do the flowers truly on one side only, because obviously now I'm seeing through the other side and I can see all those flowers and how they kind of overlap with each other from side to side, which I like the look of. I've spread them out just enough that I can see those other flowers peeking through. But you could even crowd them tighter together, especially if you were going to fill this. You might pinch them tighter together and overlap them even more, get them more like a little cluster, but all the way around. So, but yeah, this was super fun to me. I liked Shannon's suggestion of maybe even adding like the grass from the bottom. To me, some of those details are hard to hit with like the black outline to make it have that stained glass effect, but it still would be fun to kind of experiment like with a little rock edge or ground edge. And you could do that instead of continuing the stems down. You could do something kind of completely different at this bottom edge. But I think we're right at 2 o'clock. Well, it's 2 o'clock my time. Alaska
That's
time.
Right.
We're kind of right at an hour. So I am going to pull over kind of our info for everybody. And if we have any last questions, I'm going to throw this on there so that people can, I don't know if I can enlarge that or not, but I'll get this on there so people can screenshot it. So what we did for you guys is we've got all of the Copic US kind of sites. So you guys can take a screenshot and have these for later if you want to look up any of the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. YouTube and TikTok. And then this is all me. And I'm sorry, it's not all exactly the same. It's a bunch of separate ones, but you've got my Instagram, my Facebook. I am on Twitter and Pinterest. Don't do a whole lot there, but I am. And then I've got my YouTube and my blog. So these are places you can find me if you follow me on my blog, Instagram, or YouTube, or even that Facebook page. You're going to see all the other places I'm teaching and doing Copic stuff. And then if you have made one of these beautiful vases or something else with your glass project today, we'd love it if you would take a picture and hashtag Make It With Michaels on your social media so we can catch up and check that out and see what you guys are creating and what you've decided to do with the project. Let's see. I think the only thing I didn't talk about, Shannon, was the cleanup. Do we have like 2 more minutes or do we need to go?
As far as you mean cleaning up the vase, if it gets,
yeah, well, the glass and stuff.
yeah, if you want to add that really quick, I think you can do that in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah. So I know probably a lot of you out there are flustered because you've got like ink outside of your black lines in some places. So I want to tell you really fast, there's 2 ways to take care of some of those little things. You can use a colorless blender marker. And for detail, that's probably going to be the easiest way, but I'm going to caution you, I don't want to hit that black line, but I can come right along this vase, along that glass, and it's literally going to pick up and transfer onto that marker. It's going to pick it right up off the glass, and then I can just scribble it off on my scrap paper. So that is one way. The other way I can do that and not worry about my marker is doing a little bit of like alcohol cleaning solution or a handy dandy little alcohol wipe. And then you can really carefully go right up against that edge again as well. Now, if I rub up against that black and scrub it, I will make that whole flower disappear. We practiced it. Actually, we took one of my, like literally one of my practice ones and we kind of scrubbed. And eventually if I scrubbed, all of the alcohol ink is gone. All of that, that black marker is gone too. So if you're going to do some little cleanup, just be really cautious, do it really carefully, but like a rubbing alcohol on paper towel is going to work. You could use your marker with a colorless blender solution and do some really tiny little quick cleanups there as well. And I was supposed to do that and tell you guys about it. And there we go. We got it. All right.
Oh, perfect. And I just have one other question too. Oh, I think, okay, sorry. As far as how long a Copic marker lasts on other types of surfaces. And I don't know if there's a specific, like, does it take up a whole B5 sheet of paper? I know there's a statistic out there, I'm not quite sure, but I think
yeah,
they can last a pretty long time before you have to refill them.
And I think part of the issue is the people who you end up asking are instructors, and we use our markers all the time. We're using them daily. And when I color an image, I color it 4 times because I'm coloring a practice image, then I'm coloring an image for step outs and photographs, and then I'm coloring an image on, you know, for the video portion. And so unfortunately, when you ask us that question, I'm refilling my markers maybe every 2 to 3 times I use them, but it's because I use them so heavily. I know crafters who have been coloring with Copic markers on stamps for 5 to 10 years, and they may have only had to refill 2 or 3 markers. But they're coming into smaller images. They're not filling an entire page. The ones they have to refill, the sky color, the ground color, the ones that they use all time, they're B000, they're BG000. Those are the ones they're having to buy refills for and fill. And even then they've had that marker for 1 to 2 years. And then they're like, whoa, this isn't working the same way it was. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Copic maintenance, there's some great stuff from Copic. I've got stuff on my YouTube and stuff as well. So just make sure to kind of check in there, and you can get a lot more information on refilling and cleaning and all that good stuff. So
yeah, well, Thank you so much, Michelle. I think, can you just hold up your vase one more, or the glass one more time?
Yeah.
Kind of roll it on its side a little bit. In case anyone wants a screenshot, you might have to hold it with your hands, but perfect.
Yep. So I hope you guys had fun today and enjoyed, learned a few new tricks with your Copics, different things you guys can do with them. So, but thank you for joining, and make sure to share with the Make It With Michael's hashtag so we can see what you guys are completing.
Yes, thank you. And thank everyone for joining and writing such nice comments and questions. I always like to see an active chat, so I really appreciate that. And thank you guys so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to see us. We
Yep.
appreciate it so much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, bye.